Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, the tech giant Google has been fined a record £3.9 billion by the European Commission for breaching antitrust rules. Follows an investigation into claims that it made smartphone manufacturers pre-install Google's search engine and Chrome browser on Android devices, exploiting its already dominant market share at the expense of smaller developers. Google has denied any wrongdoing and said it would appeal. Our economics correspondent, Helia Abrahimi, has more. Let's start at the very beginning. What is all this browser business about?
Well, this is about Google's 10-year bet on mobile phones. The deal they made is they came up with the Android operating system and gave it away for free. But they did this in exchange for preloading phones with their apps, things like Google, Chrome, YouTube. And that gave them access to vast swathes of data on 450 million European smartphone users. And that, of course, helps them sell targeted ads. And to give you a flavour of that, that amounts this year, we're expecting to $60 billion, so a huge business.
So what is the problem? What problem does the European Commission have with all that?
Well, in a nutshell, they think they abused their power over the last 8 years. They've thwarted other operating systems from starting. They've prevented alternative apps from being preloaded. And Marguerite Vestager, the European competition czar, said this represented very serious illegal behaviour.
They have denied rivals a chance to innovate and to compete on the merits. They have denied European consumers the benefit of effective competition in the very important mobile sphere. And this is illegal under EU antitrust rules.
I mean, it's been a big day for her, but Google are already saying they're going to appeal this. And the company's chief executive today was venting his frustration, saying that Android had created more choices, not less. And certainly when you shift through the paperwork on this, you discover that some of the so-called startups that are being stymied by Google aggression include players like Amazon. I mean, I don't know who you're supposed to root for in this battle between Goliath and Goliath. And that's not to take into account what's going on with Apple, because a lot of Google's defenders say that if you don't have Android being user-friendly from the get-go, then you end up with a system where you open the door to Apple having a global monopoly.
And dare I say, it sounds a little bit like proof of Donald Trump's worldview that Europe are one of America's foes.
I mean, I think there's something in that, because European Commission certainly have Silicon Valley in its crosshairs. You saw the GDPR rules, the data protection rules come into effect a few months ago. They have real financial teeth. And a lot of Americans complained that this is because here in Europe we're jealous that we don't have our own tech giant. And that certainly feeds into Donald Trump's rhetoric. But if you look at the global history of corporate fines, here's today's fine against Google, $5 billion. But American regulators have a lot more bite, because GSK was fined $3 billion. Germany's Volkswagen was fined $15 billion over the emissions scandal. And the biggest fine of all time, British Petroleum. They were fined $21 billion in the US over the Deepwater Horizon crisis. Now, none of that history is going to temper President Trump when he meets his opposite number in Europe next week.
Indeed, it's a lot of billions of dollars. Helia, thanks very much.
The tech giant Google has been fined a record £3.9 billion by the European Commission in relation to its Android mobile operating system. The European Commission says Google unlawfully favoured its own internet search service, denying rivals the chance to compete and consumers the right to choose. Google says it will appeal, as our technology correspondent Rory Catlin-Jones tells us.
If you believe in innovation from everyone, then welcome to Android.
It sees itself as a benevolent giant that just wants to help us communicate. The EU has a different view.
Google has engaged in illegal practices to cement its dominant market position in internet search. But by the time I get there...
Google's Android operating system runs on 3/4 of Europe's mobile phones. It's free for phone makers, but the EU says that Google applies conditions which promote its own interests at the expense of rivals. There are 3 complaints: that phone makers must pre-install Google Search and Chrome if they want to use the App Store, They're paid to promote Google search by installing it and not other search engines, and that they're effectively banned from creating alternative versions of Android.
As a matter of principle, we could ourselves look up another search engine, but only 1% of us who has an Android phone say, oh, I do something else. 99%. If the search app is on your phone, this is what you use.
The fact that Google has so much control over what happens on so many phones not only gives it a lot of power, it gives it a lot of money because it collects vast amounts of data which enables it to target advertising. But the company says that ends up with a great deal for phone users. Google must now pay a record fine and change its ways within 90 days if it's not to face bigger penalties. But it's appealing against the ruling. A spokesperson said Android has created more choice for everyone, not less. A vibrant ecosystem, rapid innovation and lower prices are classic hallmarks of robust competition. With the US and Europe already locking horns over trade, the Google ruling provides another source of conflict.
I don't think trade negotiations are going to be helped by this measure. The biggest losers, however, are going to be European users of smartphones and consumers, because Google has already hinted at the prospect of changing its practices, maybe charging for some services that it didn't charge for before.
Google and other American tech giants insist they're good for consumers, but the EU is determined to curb what it sees as their abuse of their dominance. Rory Catlin-Jones, BBC News.
Let's have a brief look at some of the day's other news stories now then. Detectives investigating the Grenfell Tower fire, in which 72 people died, have carried out 3 interviews under caution as they look into allegations of manslaughter and potential health and safety breaches. The Metropolitan Police say their inquiries will involve a planned programme of interviews under caution, and there have been no arrests so far. A new inquest has reaffirmed that Private Sean Benton, who died at the Deep Cut Army Barracks in Surrey 23 years ago, took his own life. He was the first of 4 young soldiers who died from gunshot wounds in unexplained circumstances between 1995 and 2002. Inquests at the time recorded 3 open verdicts and 1 of suicide. The independent inquiry into child sexual abuse has been fined £200,000 after sending a mass email that identified possible victims. The Information Commissioner's Office said the message, which was sent to 90 people, placed vulnerable people at risk by allowing recipients to see each other's email messages.